Hello, everybody. Happy to see you. I'm Kathleen Traphagen. I'm coordinating the Grantmakers for Education Out of School Time Impact Group, and this is our monthly Friday meeting. It's actually, I'm so happy to have these on Fridays because I'm always in a good mood when I see everybody, despite the fact that it is snowing in Western Massachusetts. Just want to say that. So if you're not in Western Massachusetts, you're super lucky because it's probably spring where you are. And it was spring here yesterday, but it is not spring anymore today. And so our intro question today is your name, and this is to do in the chat, your name, your organization, and where are you from? And I am asking you to answer the where are you from question in whatever way you want to. So maybe that's geographically, maybe that's culturally, maybe that's big family, small family, whatever kind of info you feel like sharing with the group today about where you're from. So we'll give everybody a couple of minutes to do that. And while you do that, I'm going to turn it over to Gwen Hughes, and she's going to talk about our agenda for today. Gwen, on to you.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen, and welcome everyone. Happy Friday. It's so great to see all of you. And I'm joined here too by my colleague, Carrie Pardo, who's on. You can wave, Carrie. I don't know, is it in Michigan, is it snowing? No.
No, thank goodness.
Okay, good.
You guys can keep that over there. We don't want it.
Oh, that's good. So for those of you who we don't know, both Carrie and I work at the Mott Foundation, primarily on our after-school education portfolio. And what our agenda is focused on today, which is a project that we were very excited about, is the updated version of what we call the America After 3 p.m. report. And this is a report that's conducted by the Afterschool Alliance. We are a funder of this, along with just general purposes for the Afterschool Alliance. We are by no means the only funder of this report. We do this in solidarity with many of our colleagues of other foundations who really contribute, because this is a large undertaking, and it's really important that we kind of spend enough of our resources to make this the best kind of research and survey that it can be. We have tried to do this and support this effort as a priority for the field and for all of us, at least every 4 to 5 years. And so the last time, a lot of the data that the field uses for after school and then for funders and policymakers as well tends to come from, or you can trace your way back to the America After 3 report. It's where we get the estimates of the number of kids in after school, some of that kind of basic data that's really important in terms of tracking the impact of our investment. And then, this year, of course, every year, I think the Alliance does, and their team there does an amazing job with these leading researchers that you're going to hear from, to really design the updated version, because obviously every 4 to 5 years, there are new things for us to look at. And I know the Alliance team really prioritized looking at some questions around equity and participation. So we do have some new data, which is very helpful, I think, for filling out that picture of, how are kids doing in these programs, who is being served, how is the, participation rate, and how is the quality. So I'm not going to reveal any of this data, but want to turn it over to our leading researchers who we're really delighted could be with us today, and then look forward to having some conversation and discussion with all of you. So I believe I'm going to turn it over to Nikki, who is at the Afterschool Alliance team.
Thanks, Gwen. Thanks for that really great lead-in. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us here today. So Pam and I decided to split up the slides. We're going to kind of tag team on our presentation. I'm going to be covering kind of those overarching takeaways and their findings from a more macro level view, while Pam is really going to be doing the heavy lifting of the presentation and digging into the details that really underlie our key takeaways. So we have a lot to cover. I'm going to jump right into the meat of things. As Gwen shared, America After 3 p.m. is this tremendous undertaking that was made possible with the generous support of a group of funders who are fortunate saw the value in a project of this scope and were really willing to invest in this work. As she shared, we've conducted the survey every 5 to 6 years, and our goal is really to provide this in-depth look at how kids in America spend their after-school hours. The first survey that we did was back in 2004. And we started it because at that time, there was just really this absence of reliable data on what kids were doing after school between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m., right, when schools traditionally let out, but before parents typically come home from work. And America After 3 p.m. was really our attempt to start to find answers to those basic questions that Gwen mentioned. Who is in after school? Who is missing out? And really, what are those steps that need to be taken to make sure that all kids who want to be in an after-school program have the ability to take part in a program. And so really those questions, right, to both help determine and quantify the supply of after-school as well as the need for after-school in communities. And then Pam is going to start off with taking us through just how extensive of a survey this is.
Thanks, Nikki. We have a really long methodology statement because this was quite an extensive survey. I won't read through it all. There's a few things I guess you all should know. First of all, we surveyed over 31,000 parents and guardians, and this was from every state in the district. We had at least 200 completes in every state in the district. The survey was offered both online and by phone, so we had this hybrid approach to make sure that we were able to get as much coverage as possible. The survey was offered in both English and Spanish, so you could pick which you were more comfortable taking the survey in. And the survey was in the field January through March 2020. So we literally came out of the field the day the country shut down. So this is a pre-COVID survey. We have done some tracking surveys after that, and Nikki and I will kind of touch on those at the end to give you a little bit of an update on how parents and providers are feeling in 2021. But 31,000 parents and guardians, the data is what we call weighted, so that it's representative, and it's weighted by race and income within each state, and then by state population. So most of the numbers that we're going to be reporting on are kind of the national numbers. There are a few different audiences, however, and paths through this survey. A lot of the data's based on the feedback from families who have a child who participates in after school. So we just have a key here. After school participants are in blue. We also have families who don't have children in after school programs who are kind of in this clear boxes with a blue outline. All families in dark blue, and sometimes we'll compare the data to prior years, which will be in gray. When we're showing statistically significant differences between audiences, and a lot of the things that we'll look at are differences by race, ethnicity, and income. When you see blue and bold, it's higher, and red and bold, it's lower. And sometimes we'll have up and down arrows that just kind of show you differences year over year, because there were some key differences in 2020.
Okay, so on this slide, based on what we found through the survey, we came away with these kind of 5 key takeaways. We're going to be going through them one by one, but if you look at the group collectively, what it does is it paints this picture of unmet need when it comes to after-school program participation, with the heaviest burden falling on low-income families and families of color. And on the next slide, right, the first big takeaway for us to delve into is really that unmet demand has reached an all-time high. And here on this slide, you can see that nationally, that if after-school programs were available to them, half of all non-participants, so 50%, of kids who aren't in an after-school program, or nearly 25 million children, would take advantage of those programs. And this chart shows that there's been a steady increase in unmet demand since we first started America After 3 p.m., up 60% since 2004. And right now we have the highest unmet demand level in the history of America After 3 p.m. So put another way, on the next slide, what this really translates to is that for every one child who's in an after-school program, there are now 3 more who would be in a program if one were available to them. And then in the next couple of slides, Pam's going to dig into the differences by demographics and by state.
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences is just by grade level. I think, as not surprising, more children in elementary school are enrolled in after-school programs, and demand is highest among families who have kids in K through 5, lower in middle and high school. We also see significant differences by race and ethnicity. Demand is higher for Asian, Black, Hispanic, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander families. And then we also look at unmet demand by state. So here's the breakout by all 50 states in the District of Columbia. And demand has gone up in almost every state, either directionally or significantly. And the up arrows represent the significant increases. There are statistically significant increases in 23 states. Large states, small states, more populous urban states, smaller, more rural states. And if you want to really dig into the findings for your state, there is an amazing dashboard on the Afterschool Alliance's America After 3 p.m. site. This is part of the heavy lifting that Gwen was talking about. So you can click on your state, and Nikki will show us at the very end of this how you do it. Click on your state and kind of drill down on some of the key takeaways for your state if you're interested. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions in the chat. Nikki, I don't know if there was anything that you saw that people want to address.
Right. There was one question that I was asking if previous versions of America After 3 p.m. were weighted for representativeness, and they were. Edge actually took a look at how we weighted the data back in 2014 to base how we weighted the data this time around. And that happened for the previous iterations too, looking at how the previous surveys were weighted, just to make sure that we would be able to track data and be able to report out on trends. And I think that was the only question that's come in so far. There's a question about, is it access or availability that is needed? And that's a good question. And you're jumping ahead to our future findings. So I'm going to hold that question because we're going to answer it, not in this section, but in the section after. So for the second key takeaway that we wanted to focus on is that as we see demand surging, we also see parents just recognizing key benefits from after-school participation. And on the next slide, what we see behind the high levels for demand for after school is just this growing recognition of the range of benefits that programs provide for young people. And here you can see that in after school, young people are experiencing everything from opportunities to build social skills to getting nutritious snacks and meals. And then on the next slide, we look at benefits to parents. And it makes sense, right, that demand for after school is surging because parents are recognizing that they're not only benefiting their kids, but they're benefiting themselves as well. So parents with children in after-school programs see programs as this lifeline for working families because of the role that they play, both in helping them keep their jobs, but as well as giving them peace of mind, so knowing that their kid is in a safe and supportive environment while they're at work. In there is also a stat, it has the asterisk next to it. It's from the survey we conducted last fall that Pam mentioned, were to complement the America After 3 p.m. data. And we found that during the pandemic, still more than 3 in 4 parents agreed that after school programs are helping parents who are trying to find jobs. So really still that helping working families still is true during COVID. And then in the next couple of slides, Pam is going to look into kind of the changes over time and then the differences by demographics.
Right. So we see scores around these benefits going up quite significantly from 2014 to 2020. So, more parents agreeing that after school programs provide their family with peace of mind, knowing that their child is safe and supervised, that they can keep their jobs, and that these are places where their kids feel safe and can stay out of trouble. So, all of those numbers have increased anywhere from 6 to 8 points. And on the right, you see the data broken out by after families who have a kid in after school and those who don't. And while the agreement is certainly stronger with those after school families, we still see majorities of non-participants who agree with all three of these statements. And these findings are pretty consistent across demographics. If we look at the data by race, ethnicity, and income, one thing that really sticks out for us is that Black parents are really the most likely to have complete agreement with the value of after school programs across all of these statements. So when it comes to the benefits for families, this is particularly true for Black families. And then just looking at a slightly different question where we asked about the benefits to kids, you can see that large majorities believe that after school programs allow kids to really do a range of things, from being physically active to engaging with their peers and, kind of reducing screen time, to learning life skills and building confidence and responsible decision making. We see, 3/4 who feel as if it's a way for kids to gain interest in skills related to things like STEM and computer science, get excited about learning, but also reduce risky behaviors and receive, healthy snacks and foods. So this is just kind of a holistic benefit to the child. And again, if we look at this data broken out by race, ethnicity, and income, we see stronger agreement among Black, Hispanic, Native American, and low-income families. It's where you see all those blue numbers. We went on to ask our after-school families how satisfied they were with their program, and 60% are extremely satisfied. Once we add in the number who were somewhat satisfied, that number jumps to 94%. So satisfaction is really strong. That top box score, that percentage who say they're extremely satisfied, went up 10 points from 2014 to 2020. So just kind of getting back to Nikki's, number two takeaway about demand really correlating with quality. And those satisfaction scores improved across pretty much every demographic: grade level, race, ethnicity, income, as well as where families live, rural, suburban, and urban settings. And we drilled down a little bit more to understand what specific aspects of the after school experience are most important to families. That's in the darker color. And then how satisfied they are with each of those different aspects, which is in the lighter color. And the first few are what I would really call table stakes: safety, caring staff, convenient hours and location. So these are really at the top of the pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those are most important, and satisfaction is strong on all of those indicators. But right below that are some other key aspects of the after school experience: building life skills, exciting my kid about learning, making sure they have physical activity in their day, academic and homework help. And the satisfaction scores, for the most part, align with what matters most to families. If we look at those different aspects by race and ethnicity and income. Again, I just want to highlight a few after those table stakes that I mentioned earlier, because I do think it's important as we think about the experience that we provide, as well as, just to program and also communications for Black, Hispanic, and low income families, opportunities to build life skills, academic engagement, as well as homework and academic help are just more important. And just something we thought we should point out as we talk about the after school experience. I can pause there, see if there's any questions before Nikki moves on to finding number 3.
I didn't see any new questions that came into the chat.
I had a quick question, Nikki, which is, so on the slides that talked about satisfaction, is that, so like if I'm looking at the numbers for music and art, which seems kind of low, does that mean that music and art is not offered, or does that mean that parents are not satisfied with the music and art offered, or either?
That's a good question. We gave, so it's a 5-point scale, but there was also a not applicable option or an unsure option that parents could select. So they didn't have to choose that they were unsatisfied, but we did give those questions to parents regardless of if they have that program offering or not.
Yeah, we did ask a question about which of the following were offered, which I'm just trying to track down because we took it out as we were kind of streamlining this presentation. But Kathleen, I'll go ahead and find that as we're going through the other slides.
Okay, thank you.
So a lot of it does have to do with what you're offered. Nikki, you want me to take this or?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I saw a hand up, so I didn't know.
I did, yeah, just have one question.
Right.
So first of all, thanks for sharing this. I find it super interesting. I was wondering, when you were showing the increase in the agreement that those areas were positive impacts of out of school, was there a decline in the homework being a positive impact? If I'm looking at the right one from 2014, it looks like that might have been higher than this year. And I'd be curious about that if true, because I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. My question would be if that's because families are putting more value on the life and social skills part of after school programs.
That's a good question. I don't have the numbers up in front of me. I know Mario from Edge Research is also on the line. I don't know if maybe she can pull that up, but maybe while we wait and look into that, we can jump into point 3 and we can circle back.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much.
Okay. So this third takeaway, right, is focusing that while satisfaction is at this all-time high, and right, we've all talked about how both parents with and without kids in after-school programs and parents, regardless of demographics, see the value programs have for kids and families. For the first time in the history of America after 3 p.m., actually, we saw this decline in after-school participation coupled with an increase in reporting of barriers to participation in after school. So Ryan, let's get to your question about, like, is it access or availability that's needed? So in these next couple of slides, Pam's going to help us unpack these two things a little bit.
So we asked parents what factors, those who don't have a child in after school, what factors have influenced your decision not to enroll your child? And what we see here is, kind of the list of barriers. And the number one barrier is families who just prefer to keep their child at home or with another adult during the after school hours. But right after that is the fact that after school programs are too expensive at 57%. My child doesn't have a safe way to get to and from after-school programs for transportation coming up for 53% of non-participants. There are some families who feel like their child is just old enough to care for themselves, and we did include families of children in K through 12. We have half of people who are concerned about negative influences in these programs, and similar numbers who are just worried about convenience and the hours of operation, and 42% who say that after-school programs just aren't available in their community. So as we look at some of these barriers to participation, you can see that barriers around cost and access have gone up quite significantly, anywhere from 13 to 15 points from 2014. So a big increase in the percentage who feel as if these programs are too expensive, transportation being a barrier, convenience being a barrier, as well as a big increase of 13 points in after-school programs just not being available in their community. So access and cost definitely increasing over this period of time.
And what we see with this growth, right, and barriers to participation in after schools, as we talked about, is it's really translating to fewer young people in after school programs today than in 2014. And it's actually fewer young people than what we found in 2009. This is actually the biggest surprise of our survey. It's the first time that we found a drop in after school participation. And then on the next few slides, Pam is going to show what this looks like across states and highlight a few key points related to after school program participation.
So if we look at this by state, and again, this data is available to really drill down on Afterschool Alliance's website, there are 18 states where we saw a statistically significant drop, and these are, from big states like California and Florida and New York and Texas to smaller states like Maine and Nebraska. So dips in a number of different states, either significantly where you see the down arrows or directionally where you don't. If we kind of look at who is actually participating in after-school programs, you can see that about 6 in 10 are elementary school kids, 2 in 10 middle, 2 in 10 high school. The gender mix is pretty even at 50-50. About a third qualify for free and reduced price lunch, and that is fewer than actually qualify nationally. So after school participants definitely under index in the free and reduced price lunch category. 2 in 10 are children with special needs, and these are children, we define it as a child who's been diagnosed with physical, emotional, or learning disabilities. And then if we look at the breakdown by race and ethnicity, 6 in 10 after school children are white, 21% are Hispanic, 19% Black, 7% Asian, 2% Native American, and 1% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders. You can see that the number for white children is in red. So actually white families under index on after school participation, and Hispanic and Black families over index on after school participation. But when we kind of look at the intersection of race and income, one of the things that is really interesting to see is that there is definitely a bigger income gap with Black and Hispanic families versus white families.
Oh, Pam, really quickly, there's a question about explaining the over and under indexing.
Right. So, for instance, 66% of children who are, children are white. So when I say it under indexes, 60% of children are enrolled in after school programs. So just lower than the population. Over index would be higher than the population, the percentage of the population. one of the questions that I know Nikki gets a lot is, where are our children going to after school programs? And 76% of programs are actually located in a public school. Half of programs are run by public schools. Other programs that are housed in public schools might be run by other entities. But after public schools, about a third of after school participants are in a program being run by one of the big youth organizations, whether it be Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, YWCA, 4-H. And then after that, we kind of have a smattering of different types of providers, private schools, parks and rec, religious institutions, libraries, science centers, etc. And this is, I will just note that we've been doing some tracking during COVID, and this has been a barrier to participation during COVID, just because a lot of public schools have been closed during this time. So we did want to take a slightly broader view of after school. And I think, Nikki, maybe that was one thing that we forgot to do, which was just kind of read people a definition of how Afterschool Alliance defines after school. But we did want to kind of understand, beyond kind of traditional after school programs, are kids participating in other activities in the afternoon, whether they be hobbies or sports or tutoring, etc. And there are a large number of households who have kids in some type of afternoon activity, 74%. This does skew more in families who live in urban and suburban areas. The numbers are higher among white families, among higher income families, and kind of the number one type of activity beyond a traditional after school program that the kids participate in or organized sports. Then it's, special lessons like art or music or karate or something like that. And this is where we do see differences. So traditional after school programs definitely are more likely to cater to elementary school kids. I think it was 60% of children in after school are elementary school kids. But when it comes to some of these more broader activities, participation is actually higher in the high school grades versus the lower grades. And it kind of climbs as you get older.
So there were a couple of questions in the chat about data collection, and Marielle shared that, yes, we collected this data in early 2020, so January through early March. So really we see this as a pre-pandemic snapshot of after school. We did do 2 follow-up, much smaller, just nationally, being able to report out numbers nationally in the summer and in the fall to get that COVID look at what's happening in after school, according to parents. But it was kind of, it wasn't the pandemic that affected the drop in participation. We were asking parents to think about kind of the start of 2019, or sorry, the fall of 2019. And then there was another question, Pam, that asked about if the survey was conducted via phone and if the response rates have changed since 2014.
So the survey was conducted both online and by phone, and phone response rates have dropped since 2014. So we actually conducted a larger percentage of the completes online versus phone, but we did want to do a mixed methodology so that households that might not have reliable internet access could participate in the survey. And again, we offered the survey in both English and Spanish.
And I think this question is about the kind of general, broader out of school time activities. The question from Frank asked, are the race and income results consistent across the 3 school breakpoints, elementary, middle, and high school, or was it only represented as the average?
Say that one more time, Nikki. I'm sorry, I did not follow that one.
That's okay. Or maybe Frank, if you wanted to unmute yourself, you could ask the question.
Yeah, if you go back a couple of slides where you had the graphics on each of the elementary, middle, and high school rates, and then along the bottom
Oh, yeah.
had race data. What did we see any disparities between the groups or any differences based on age level versus income versus race?
That is something, Frank, that I probably would need to run. But if you send your email, we can certainly look at that and get back to you. Because to look at the intersection of 3 different demographics on a particular question would just take a special run. So happy to do it, though.
All right. So for this fourth takeaway, and Pam touched on this a little bit in these last couple of slides, that it's not only that there are greater challenges to participation, right? But it's also that challenges are even greater for specific segments of the population. And in this next section, we're going to really start to dig into the inequities that we kind of unearthed when we were looking at barriers to participation.
Yeah, so I think probably of no surprise, there are definitely large barriers by income. Those in lower income brackets, those who qualify for free and reduced price lunch, are much more likely to feel as if programs are too expensive, that there are transportation barriers, that there are location barriers, that there are just availability barriers in their community. We also see some of these differences by race and ethnicity. In particular, Asian, Black, and Hispanic families are more likely to feel as if there are transportation issues, as well as kind of location issues with after-school programs. One of the things related to just the cost issue is that the number of people who indicate that they've been able to get government assistance to cover the cost of after-school programs has dropped 5 points from 2014, and that the amount that they receive has also gone down significantly. One of the things that we wanted to do to just kind of understand the opportunity gap was to calculate at a kind of more macro level how much families are spending on a variety of out of school time activities. So we looked at after school programs, we looked at some of those extracurricular activities that I just talked about, and then we also looked at how much families are spending on summer camp and other kind of summer programming. And then what we did is some kind of back of the envelope math, and we were able to calculate the average overall that families are spending, and then look at them by different income percentiles. And what you can see here is that those in kind of the highest income brackets are spending more than 5 times as much on out of school time programming as those in the lowest bracket. And while majorities in all income brackets participate in some type of out of school time activity, whether it be after school or extracurricular or summer, it is significantly lower among those in the lowest income brackets versus those in higher income brackets.
And then we had 2 more questions come into the chat. Yes, Ryan, it is individuals who reported that they're receiving kind of subsidies to help pay for the after-school programs, not the programs who received the funds. And then Pam Corey had a question about a sample. And her question is, if you could say more about why the sample was 66% white, because it seems much higher than what Google has said that public school, the percentage of students in public school.
So we included all families of kids who have kids in kindergarten through 12th grade. And again, we made sure that the data matched census information. We looked at the 2018 American Community Survey, which is kind of the most up-to-date information about demographics in this country, and the data was weighted by race, ethnicity, and income within state and then across states. So, you know, the data kind of represents census data, which is really the best that we can do in terms of making sure our sample is representative.
And then, thanks, Pam. That also answers, I think, Richard's question was if, oh, he was asking if costs are also weighted in terms of location. No, they weren't weighted, but we did look at differences in cost by region. We just didn't show the slide on it. And we found that, you know, there is like a range where costs in rural communities is slightly lower than in suburban communities, so that there is a difference that we see in terms of cost. And Kathleen said maybe the difference between public school students and all students. So going back to the
Yeah, I was just thinking that maybe that explains, right? If the public, what did Corey say again? Like 48% or less than 50% of public students are now students of color, but if your whole thing was all young people, then that included young people going to private school and et cetera.
That's still under 50% though. I'm wondering if it's the weighting by state that's doing it, that if you're weighting evenly across states, there are a lot of states that are disproportionately white that have low populations.
We weren't weighting evenly across states. So we were weighting at the family level. We can take a look at this, but I'm happy to go back and look at our sources, but.
I was just surprised when you said 60% white was under indexed. I thought you were going to say it was over indexed. And the free lunch looked like that was also under indexed.
Yeah, free lunch was definitely under indexed.
That would be surprising to me if there were fewer white kids than you, or more white kids than you would expect, but fewer low-income kids than you would expect.
Well, one of the things that we don't have in this deck, but is in the larger deck, is that white families are more likely to have children come home and be with a parent after school. White families and Native American families are more likely to have either a parent or some other adult who are supervising them after school. Nikki, you want to wrap us up?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I wasn't sure if there's still going to be more discussion around that. All right, so we wanted to end the last takeaway as kind of like this one, and on a bright spot, right? So it's that parents are very much in support of expanding after school opportunities. And in the next slide, one of the questions that we've asked since 2009 is about support for public funding for after school. And this is really for us to be able to kind of gauge how invested parents are in after school. And what we found is that over the years that support is high. 2020 wasn't an exception. 87% of parents said that they were in favor of public funding for after school opportunities. And another significant finding is that after school is an issue that has strong support that cuts across party lines. It's one of these issues that we found is truly bipartisan in nature, and you can see that right across the political spectrum, people are supportive of. And then on the next slide, Pam's going to kind of dig into some of the differences.
Yeah, I mean, you've already talked about the bipartisan support. I guess the other thing to mention is just that you know, favorability has been strong over the years, but it has gone up 3 points from 2014 to 2020. We do see some differences by demographic groups, so stronger support in urban areas versus rural areas among those who participate in after-school programs versus those who don't. But still, you know, majorities in all of these different among all of these different audiences is pretty strong. And in terms of race and ethnicity, we actually don't see any statistically significant differences, and we really haven't seen a lot of change over time. I do want to just kind of really briefly touch on the post-COVID or during COVID survey that Nikki mentioned, just because this is the most recent snapshot that we have about parent perceptions of after-school programs during this kind of incredibly bizarre period that we've been in, and also very challenging period that we've been in over the last year plus. We did ask in this survey about demand, just as we did in the previous survey, and among non-participants, demand really for after-school programs, even during COVID, remains strong. 49% of children who would participate in a program if one was available, so just like a point lower than kind of pre-COVID. The barriers to participation also remain pretty consistent, although the number one barrier during COVID was families' concern about sending their kid to an after-school program when we were in the middle of a pandemic. But right after that, you know, concerns about money, transportation, and convenience. We also asked some questions just about what was on the minds of parents and what they're kind of dealing with during this COVID period. And this tracks with a lot of other parent surveys that we're doing right now, but you know, concerns about their kids staying on track in school, definitely a high degree of concern around social and emotional well-being, social connections, their kids spending too much time in front of screens, and also just the ability to get outside and have some physical activity. We then pivoted and we asked people, what are they looking for in after-school programming? And at the time during fall 2020, parents were focused most on physical activity, opportunities to build life skills, academic engagement, and just kids being able to interact with other children. Support for public funding for after-school programming remained pretty consistent in October of 2020 versus the data that we just showed you a moment ago.
Oh, sorry. This slide is looking at the provider side of things. So based on the survey of after-school program providers that actually just came out of the field last month, we found that programs are increasingly opening their doors. Right? So now 3 and 4 are physically open in some capacity compared to less than 1 and 5 back last spring. And programs are offering the supports that Pam just shared. We heard that families want for their kids, right? It's not just academic enrichment, but it's also time for relationship building and time for being physically active. We also did ask about summer, which I didn't include on this slide, but about 8 and 10 programs who typically offer summer programming said that they had plans to operate this summer, and about 2 and 3 plan to serve students in person, and about a quarter report that they're going to operate in a hybrid, so that in-person and virtual mix. And then at the bottom, kind of half of the slide, we also asked providers about their thoughts for their future. More than 5 and 6 are concerned about the program's long-term funding and future. and almost half are concerned about providing in-person services in the fall. The intensity of concern is actually lower now than it was through the waves we conducted back in 2020, and perhaps, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, with that designated support for after school and summer learning. In the next wave of the survey, we'll see those numbers go down even more. But this is all to say that there is still this definite uncertainty about the future among program providers. And then in the next couple of slides, I just really quickly wanted to share some of the resources that we released as part of America After 3 p.m. last year. So on the left side is the interactive dashboard that Pam talked about, where you can find state-specific information. There's a drop-down menu. You can also click on the state and the map. And so it's really this kind of bird's eye view to compare differences across states. And then on the right-hand side, it's the state dashboards where you can find all of the state's information all in one place, including their state-specific fact sheets, which is on the next slide. I did a quick screenshot. So we have a fact sheet for all 50 states plus DC. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot of one of the infographics that we released. It's really to show how we took what we found to be our key takeaways, right, and translated them into these data visualizations that make it just a lot easier to share findings through social media channels. And then in the last slide, it's a look at what's coming next. We couldn't dig deeper into everything that we wanted to cover in our first report, so we were very lucky to have the support of funders who are helping make some of the special reports on summer, on STEM, on rural communities, and then on health and wellness possible through this year and into early 2020. So that's the end of our slide deck. I don't know if there are any other questions that people have, or else I can turn it back over to Kathleen.
You've got one here from Richard. Richard, feel free to ask it if you'd like.
Yes, so given the barriers around cost and access and transportation at the local level, so I'm not talking about the national foundations here, but at the local level, where do you suggest philanthropic funding be invested? Should we invest in the programs, or should we invest in those structures that improve access?
That's a really great question. And I think it really depends on what is happening at the local level, right? I think it depends. I think if you have strong after-school programs in the community, it's worth it to invest in them and seeing where their struggles are. When we released America After 3 p.m. back in 2014, Higher Achievement of the branch in Philadelphia used the findings to work with their local funders to invest in transportation because they saw access and getting to and from programs was a huge barrier for families in their community. So they used it for transportation. They invested, I think they were able to get a few buses to be able to get kids from schools to the programs. In other cases, it's maybe that programs need more staff. And especially, I think now with COVID, right, it's a different situation where we're seeing that when we ask programs, what are some of your concerns thinking about the summer? Being able to hire enough staff is a huge concern. So investing in staffing and people, especially because of the different ratios, student to staff ratios. And there are also concerns about location, and Pam shared that slide about where programs are located. A majority of parents said that their after-school programs were in schools, and we know during COVID, a lot of schools were closed to community partners. So programs had to find alternatives to offer programming, and some programs weren't even able to open. They had to do everything virtually just because they didn't have access to a facility where they could bring children. So I would recommend connecting with program providers, or maybe a statewide after-school network in your state to look at what kind of the needs are in your community. I think it is very a localized issue.
And Richard, you know, as we're closing up here, thank you, Nikki, and thank you all to our Edge Research folks who are able to do this and the Alliance. You know, to your point, I think it would be great. We would love to sort of further engage in what are the ramifications of this and how can we leverage our, you know, the philanthropic community. You know, one of my takeaways here, as we saw these results come in, is that a lot of the quality work and increased investment is working. That, you know, the quality satisfaction level keeps going up, but the public availability of programs, the public funding has not kept up with demand. And, you know, so I think it's a great sort of segue maybe into some future conversations that we can all have about how do we use this data to inform, you know, what we're next sort of focusing on. So it's a great, that's something that I know we would welcome and could be part of some future conversations.
I have been also, I'm the terrible multitasker, so I have been watching the chat, and I really love how people are just jumping in and having a conversation. And we are going to continue to have these conversations. Super appreciate your time today. I put in the chat about our next convening, which we'll be talking about data systems with Corey and Christina from Policy Study Associates and New Profit. That's based on the Measure, Use, Improve book and work that many of you have been involved in. So please join us for that. We'll post everything on the GFE website within a week. So check that out under past programs. There'll be a page for this program and it will have everything, including the answers to the follow-up questions. So thanks again, everybody, and hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
Kathleen.
you. Thank you.